In this video, I want to look at Romans chapter 1, verses 26 through 27. This is Paul's longest teaching about homosexuality, and in it, he summarizes a lot of what we've read in Genesis and the Old Testament, and even what he's been getting at in some of these other passages that we've looked at. So let's begin by talking about the context of Romans 1. Romans 1 teaches us about the universal sinfulness of humanity, that all of us stand before God as sinners, and the ultimate way we know that we're sinners is we have rejected God as the Creator. All of our sins are really symptoms that point to the fact that we have rejected God as our Creator. And as a result, as we continue to tell God that we don't need Him, we don't want Him, we don't care what He says, God gives humanity over to its sins. And this is what Romans 1:24 teaches us. Therefore, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves. That as humans rejected God and made their own gods and worshiped God however they wanted to, or worshiped false gods, really, God gave them up to the lusts of their heart. That as we reject God and as we continue to sin, it turns to sexual sins and dishonoring of our bodies. And so at this point, Paul gives us the example of what this looks like. One of the clear ways that we know that people have rejected God and have chosen a path different from what God has said is right is homosexuality. That's his argument in 26 through 27. Here's what we read in the Bible. For this reason, that is because people have rejected God, they've exchanged the truth about God for a lie, it says in verse 25, for this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions, for their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. What we find in the Bible is that homosexuality and lesbianism are examples of these shameless acts. They are examples of people who have rejected God and are choosing to go their own way. And especially in this passage, we read that these sexual behaviors are unnatural. They're an affront to the Creator. We saw in Genesis that God has designed the world in a certain way. He has designed marriage and men and women in a complementary way. Homosexuality and lesbianism are unnatural, and they are an affront to the way that God has created the world. And interestingly, as Romans 1 continues, it says some pretty scary things for those of us who live in this day and age, because in fact the Bible condemns those who engage in these actions, and it also condemns those who condone them, who approve of them. Look at Romans 1:32. Though they know God's decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. Here's what the Bible is saying. It's talking about not just homosexuality, it's talking about all sins, adultery. You can see all the different sins that are listed in the paragraph above. It's talking to people who look at sin and say, that's okay, you can do it, don't worry about it. God condemns those people who know that sin is wrong but approve of it anyway. And we have a lot of that going on in our culture. Perhaps we even have a lot of that going on in our churches. And so what we need to understand, Romans 1 is clear that homosexuality is a rejection of God's authority. God has made the world to work a certain way, and homosexuality rejects that and says, God, I don't want you to be God. I don't want you to be Lord over this issue. I want to do things my way. I want to give in to my lust and my passions. It's not the only sin condemned in Romans 1. There are many sins condemned in Romans 1, but it is a clear sign that a person has rejected God's authority. So that ends this section looking at what Paul has to say about homosexuality. We're going to wrap up with some concluding thoughts as we put this whole study together in the next part.